Hey guys, tonight we step into a story that is all salt spray, rain-damp stone, and that slightly eerie feeling you get when you know a place has secrets. Imagine a harbor where the gulls never quite go to sleep, where the boats creak against their moorings like restless dreamers, and where, even at dusk, you feel eyes on you from behind lace curtains. That's where we begin, in a northern seaside town that could be anywhere or nowhere. And if you ever thought you'd like to stroll there on your own after dark, well, let's just say you probably won't survive this without a decent raincoat, an umbrella, and maybe someone who knows how to brew strong tea. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's always a little fun to see if someone out there is listening at 3 in the morning with the fridge humming as their only company. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along the slick cobblestones, feeling the uneven stones beneath your shoes, and the town seems both alive and half asleep. The harbor stretches out in front of you, dotted with fishing boats that look battered but not defeated. Their nets hang heavy with the day's catch and smell faintly of brine and seaweed. The water itself is restless, dark as ink, and yet it reflects the scattered lights of cottages and pubs as though clinging to brightness against the night. You hear snippets of conversation drifting through the damp air, short, clipped sentences, more gesture than explanation. The dark wives, that's the phrase that keeps circling in your head. Nobody has explained it yet, but everyone seems to know. You hear it whispered when the tide is coming in, muttered over pint glasses, and once, in passing, hissed by a child who should probably have been in bed. The name feels both folkloric and modern, part superstition, part crime report. You don't know which yet, and that uncertainty makes you lean in. Your first brush with the mystery comes in the form of smell. Always trust your nose here. A curl of peat smoke mixes with salt air, and suddenly you're aware of how people have lived on this edge for centuries. Fishermen hauling nets, wives watching the horizon, children running barefoot with seaweed in their hair. Historically, many coastal towns depended almost entirely on herring, a fish so abundant in the 19th century that it was called silver of the sea. That silver bought houses, clothes, and sometimes whole reputations. Yet historians still argue whether the herring boom was a blessing or a curse, because when the fish vanished, poverty and bitterness washed in with the tide. You push deeper into the harbor quarter, and the architecture tells its own tale. Granite cottages lean together like conspirators, their windows glistening with condensation. Wooden doors are painted in colors that have faded, unevenly turquoise, oxblood, mustard, like a palette left too long in the rain. The quirky detail, above one doorway, hangs a horseshoe nailed upside down. Usually, tradition insists on hanging it open end up to hold luck. Here it spills downward, a deliberate act, locals say, to keep the wrong kind of spirits out rather than trap good luck in. You make a mental note. This is not a place where superstition stays politely in museums. Walking along the quay, you pass a pub with its door ajar, laughter spilling out like warm breath. The signboard creaks, and the name painted across it makes you pause. The Widow's Net. You wonder if this is just clever marketing or something darker. Inside, voices are cheerful, but edged with the sharpness of people who've known hardship. One old man mentions the wives with a glance so quick you almost miss it. You'd swear his tone wasn't about companionship, but about something binding, almost contractual. As the tide shifts, you notice how the town itself changes rhythm. The boats settle lower, ropes tightening, and shadows deepen. It's in these in-between moments that people glance toward the sea as if expecting it to return not just fish but memories, confessions, maybe even bodies. You feel the hairs on your neck stir, and not just from the cold. There's a scholarly debate, you recall. Did small coastal communities genuinely believe in sea spirits and ominous wives, or did they use such stories to enforce social rules? Folklore can be discipline wrapped in a bedtime tale. Nobody wants to break curfew if they think the dark wives are waiting. Yet, as you watch a group of children skip stones at the edge of the quay, you sense the stories aren't just warnings, they're shared history, a way to knit generations together in the absence of written records. A bell clanks somewhere offshore, a buoy marking dangerous rocks. Its hollow toll seems like a voice trying to form words. You stand there, listening, and realize how sound travels differently here. Every clang, every gull's cry, every shuffle of boots across stone carries weight. You've barely arrived, but already the town's cadence has slipped under your skin. You glance up and notice the sky itself is a character-thick clouds rolling like wet wool, the last orange of sunset bleeding into iron gray. The air smells faintly metallic, like coins in your palm, as though reminding you that fortunes here have always been tethered to water and weather. And then, almost without realizing it, you're at the far end of the harbor, where the land gives way to a narrow path curling upward along the cliffs. A lantern swings in the wind, hanging from a crooked post, its glass cracked. The faint glow barely pushes back the night, but it is enough to remind you that people pass this way even after dark. That's the first moment you understand you're not just strolling through a scenic fishing village. You're entering a place where past and present blur like sea spray on spectacles, where every whispered phrase might be a breadcrumb leading you toward the dark wives. And whether you're ready or not, the tide is already pulling you further in. You leave the harbor behind, though the tang of salt never really fades. It clings to your coat, your hair, even your tongue, as though the sea has already marked you. The narrow lane curves away from the water, squeezed between stone walls streaked with lichen. You pass windows that glow like watchful eyes, curtains twitching just enough to confirm what you already feel. You are being noticed. Communities like this thrive on observation. Every glance, every gesture, every silence gets catalogued into the great ledger of gossip. And you, stranger or not, have been written into it by now. You walk slower, partly to listen, partly because the cobbles have grown more uneven, damp moss making them slick. Somewhere behind you, a door shuts softly, too soft for accident, too precise for chance. You duck into the main square, if you can call it that. It's really just a widening in the road, framed by a handful of shops. A post office with a faded sign, a bakery that smells faintly of yeast even at this hour, and a general store with its blinds half drawn. The square feels smaller than it looks, because the air itself seems compressed by all the unsaid words hanging there. The hush is broken only by the clatter of a cart rolling over stones, pulled by a tired-looking pony whose breath clouds in the air. Here, gossip is currency. The woman at the bakery door whispers with the man from the store, and you know the subject isn't the weather. Their voices drop when you pass, but you catch a single word, wives. It lands heavy, as if the syllable itself carries a weight no one wants to claim out loud. One historical fact surfaces as you stroll in small fishing towns across Britain. It was often the women who managed finances while men were at sea. They kept accounts, mended nets, even bartered for supplies. Some scholars argue that these women wielded more power than outsiders realized, shaping both the economy and the social code. Yet, historians still argue whether that influence was true authority or just responsibility with no recognition. You feel that debate breathing through this square, each hushed conversation a reminder of the silent power structures that still ripple beneath the surface. You pause at the stone trough in the middle of the square. Rainwater fills it to the brim, rippling slightly in the breeze. At its base, carved faintly into the stone, you notice a symbol: two interlocking spirals. A fringe tidbit for you. In Celtic tradition, spirals often symbolized cycles, eternity, or duality. But here the carving is lopsided, as though done in haste, and someone has rubbed soot into the grooves to make them visible again. Quirk or warning, you can't yet tell. The locals' loyalty to ritual is almost tangible. At 7 on the dot, you hear shutters bang closed in quick succession, like dominoes tipping one after the other. A lamp flickers on in a window. A kettle whistles faintly behind a wall. These are ordinary actions, but the timing makes them feel choreographed. Like a village-wide signal you haven't been given the code for. The sense of debt is just as present. You watch a boy hand over a wrapped parcel to a woman with weathered hands. She slips him a coin, but the exchange is slower than necessary, drawn out like a performance. Everyone watching knows the meaning isn't in the object, but in the balance it represents. One obligation met, another created. You get the feeling that if you asked anyone about the Dark Wives directly, you'd be told it was none of your business, but everyone would mark down the fact that you asked. A small group gathers near the post office, shuffling letters as though they're relics. One man laughs too loudly, but his laughter cuts off sharply when an older woman approaches. She doesn't say a word, yet her presence quiets the group. You sense the hierarchy here is subtle but rigid. Certain voices carry weight simply by existing. As you drift back toward the narrow lane, you hear a snippet that makes you pause. A girl, maybe 12, is scolded by her mother for humming a tune. The words are sharp. Not that song, not now. You're left wondering what song could be so forbidden. Another breadcrumb dropped casually in your path. Your steps take you past a bench beneath a crooked lamppost. The light buzzes faintly, then steadies. You sit, if only for a moment, to absorb the scene. The square is quiet now, but the quiet isn't empty, it's loaded. Every silence feels like a sentence with the final word left out, daring you to guess. And then, faintly, you hear the sea again. Not with your ears this time, but with your bones. A vibration, a reminder that beneath all this human choreography, tides are pulling, relentless. You realize the town's rituals are just another tide, their own way of marking time and guarding secrets. You stand, brushing damp from the bench, and glance back at the square. People have melted into houses, doors closed, curtains drawn, but the feeling lingers. You've been watched, measured, and filed away. You're no longer anonymous. You are now part of their ledger, whether you like it or not. And somewhere between the smell of yeast, the spiral carved in stone, and the shuttered windows, you sense that the Dark Wives are closer, not just whispered folklore, but stitched into the daily fabric of this place. You follow the lane uphill, your shoes slipping slightly on the damp stones, and the town's murmur fades behind you. The higher you climb, the more the harbor looks like a painted toy set boats, bobbing like matchsticks. Rooftops, huddled together like nervous animals. But the further you go, the quieter it becomes, until you hear only the scrape of your own breath and the faint wheeze of the sea far beneath the cliffs. At the crest stands a squat building, half ruin, half defiance. It used to be a schoolhouse, the locals say. The walls lean with age, roof patched with mismatched tiles. A brass plate on the door green with corrosion reads, Community Hall. You hesitate, then push the door. It yields, complaining in a drawn-out creak, and you step inside. The air smells of chalk dust and damp paper. A notice board sags under layers of pinned announcements, bake sales, council meetings, lost cats. But one corner holds a display of old photographs, sepia-toned, curling at the edges. Villagers pose stiffly, fishermen in heavy boots, women in aprons, children with faces far too solemn for their age. The captions are sparse: 1924 Regatta, Women's Choir, 1931, Harbor Gala, 1949. And then you see it, the photograph that halts you. A group of women stand side by side on the quay, their dresses plain, their expressions unreadable. Something in their posture unsettles you. They're not smiling, not even trying to. They look as though they're waiting for a verdict. Beneath it, a label, The Dark Wives, 1936. The name is finally out in the open, etched in tidy handwriting, as if it were just another harmless club, like the choir or the gala. But staring at their faces, you know it wasn't harmless at all. One woman's eyes are sharp as glass, another's chin tilts defiantly. A third stares just past the camera as though she sees something behind the photographer. You could almost believe they're still watching you, across decades. You reach out, fingertips brushing the glass, when the door slams behind you. The echo jolts through the hall, and for a second you think someone has followed you. But when you turn, the doorway is empty, only the wind rushing through. You exhale, shaky, reminding yourself that old buildings love a bit of drama. Still, your pulse doesn't settle. Because the moment you touched that photograph, you caught a reflection, a flicker in the glass of something behind you. Maybe just your own silhouette, warped by the cracked frame. Or maybe not. There's a scholarly debate that tickles the edge of your memory. Some argue that photographs of women's groups in the early 20th century were part of a broader movement toward documenting female independence. Others claim they were simply cataloging the domestic backbone of seaside communities. Historians still argue whether groups like this were guardians of tradition or quiet rebels, pushing boundaries under the cover of custom. You look again at those faces and feel the answer might be both. On the back wall, more photographs line up. Processions, fishing crews, maypoles, but none bear that charged intensity. None make your stomach dip like the wives. And that leads to the casual question that nearly undoes you. You don't notice her, at first a woman folding chairs near the far corner, hair tucked under a scarf, sleeves rolled up. She must have been here all along, working silently while you explored. She clears her throat and asks, almost idly, "You know who they are, don't you?" The words hang in the air, not quite challenge, not quite invitation. You manage a shrug, though your mouth is dry. She studies you with eyes that seem older than her face. Best not to stare too long. The wives don't like being remembered. Then she turns back to her chairs, as though she hasn't just pulled the rug out from under your evening. You step outside, gulping the fresh air. Though it doesn't feel fresh at all, it feels heavy, as though every gust carries whispers you can't catch. The sun has drowned completely now, leaving only a bruised twilight smeared across the horizon. On the path downhill, your mind gnaws at the puzzle. Why would a community pin up that photograph if they wanted it forgotten? Is it a warning, a reminder, or a dare? The quirky detail that distracts you for a moment. A garden you pass has a scarecrow dressed not in rags, but in an old bridesmaid dress, lavender silk stained by rain. Its head is a sack stuffed with straw, painted with two coal dark eyes. It watches you like a parody of those women in the photos smiling when it shouldn't. You can't shake the unease. Was the woman in the hall warning you or testing you? Either way, you know you've tugged at a thread that doesn't want to be pulled, and yet curiosity keeps you moving, step after step, deeper into the coil of their history. The village is quieter than ever, windows sealed, lamps dimmed. The photograph burns behind your eyelids each time you blink, those unflinching faces staring through you. You realize you don't just want to know who they were, you need to, because in a town that trades in whispers, silence speaks louder than words. You keep moving down into the narrower streets that twist like fishing lines left tangled after a long day at sea. The photograph still clings to you, those women's eyes replaying in your mind as though they've followed you out of the hall. The night has deepened into a dense blue, with just a scrap of moon cutting through thin cloud. You draw your coat tighter, not against cold, but against the odd sensation of walking through someone else's memory. The houses here lean closer, walls crusted with salt, roofs bowed from endless storms. Curtains twitch again, though maybe it's only your imagination this time. You catch laughter spilling faintly from one house, then the thud of boots, then nothing. Silence drops, quick as a guillotine. As you round a corner, you nearly collide with a cat. It's black, naturally, and it darts across your path with a low growl. You chuckle, despite yourself, muttering something about cliches. But the cat stops halfway down the lane, turns, and stares, as though daring you to follow. You don't. You've got enough mysteries tonight, without feline escorts into alleyways. A smell draws you next, peat smoke laced with something sweeter, maybe dried lavender. You trace it to a small cottage with its door slightly ajar. From inside comes the murmur of voices, too low to catch, and the clink of crockery. You shouldn't linger, but curiosity outweighs manners. You lean closer and catch only a fragment. Best keep it locked, not after last time. Then a cough, and the voices go quiet. Secrets stack up quickly here, like nets piled high after a catch. Everyone seems to carry a private grief, and the trick is knowing which ones matter. Historically, coastal households often kept stories, hushed infidelity, loss at sea, disputes over inheritance. In a community this small, shame traveled faster than truth. Historians still argue whether silence was protection or punishment, whether keeping secrets spared people's dignity or chained them to guilt. You walk, wondering how many stories are nailed shut inside these walls. You stop at a cottage with peeling whitewash and a crooked chimney. In the front garden, half hidden by weeds, stands a stone well. Its rim is mossy, its bucket long gone, but you peer in any way. Darkness swallows your gaze, and you shiver at the thought of what might lie beneath the fringe tidbit. In medieval England, wells were sometimes used not just for water, but for disposal of waste, yes, but also of secrets better drowned than discussed. Archaeologists have found coins, charms, even shoes, tucked at the bottom of village wells, as if the water could guard what people couldn't admit. You wonder what this well holds. Further along, another cottage has a window propped open, letting lamplight spill across the lane. On the sill rests a row of jars, pickled onions, chutney, and one filled with something dark, nearly black. A small label reads only for winter. You smile at the quaintness, though your smile falters when you realize the lid is nailed shut. Who nails a jar closed? You pause outside a larger house, once belonging to a sea captain, if the carved anchor on its lintel is anything to go by. Its shutters are bolted, even though no storm threatens. An old superstition comes to mind. Some believed keeping houses shuttered during calm nights prevented wandering spirits from finding entry. Again, you wonder whether this is quaint tradition or living fear. As you move through these narrow lanes, you notice the repetition of one thing: knots. Knots carved into woodwork, painted above doorframes, etched into window panes. Sailors' knots, lovers' knots, endless loops, a quirky detail, but not accidental. You recall that knotwork was once used as a protective charm, tying trouble up, literally binding danger so it couldn't slip inside. It's a practical magic, the kind that grows in places where storms claim men and widows grow old too quickly. And yet, for all these symbols and silences, grief seeps through. You glimpse framed portraits inside living rooms, husbands in uniform, sons with medals, daughters smiling beside bouquets. But some frames face inward, turned toward the wall, as if the memories themselves are too sharp to bear. One door opens suddenly as you pass. A woman steps out, balancing a pail. She's middle-aged, face-lined, but not unkind, and she eyes you with weary curiosity. "Out late," she murmurs, not quite a question. You nod. She studies you a beat longer, then adds, "Be careful what you ask about. The wives don't like their sleep disturbed." She lifts her pail and disappears into the shadows before you can reply. The phrase again. Always the wives, never defined, always implied. And now you start to see it. The unspoken fear stitched through ordinary lives. It's not just folklore, they live with it, breathe it, tuck it under their pillows. At the end of the lane, the road opens onto a small square. In the middle stands a weathered cross, its stone eaten by centuries of wind. Around its base, offerings, cluster shells, ribbons, a child's toy car, even a cracked wristwatch. Odd tributes, left quietly. One ribbon catches your eye, embroidered in clumsy stitching, for her return. You stand, staring at the cross, when the cat reappears. It winds around your legs, tail high, then bolts into the darkness. You almost laugh, almost, till you realize it's running toward the cliffs, toward the sea. And you know, with the certainty that only instinct gives, that the secrets of this town are tide-marked. Hidden griefs, half-buried feuds, superstitions still alive. The wives aren't just a photograph. They are present, somehow, in every knot, every shudder, every whisper that cuts off too soon. And you feel yourself leaning closer, dangerously closer, to learning why. The cliff path narrows as you follow it toward the edge of town, boots scuffing against stones, slick with spray. The air is sharper here, filled with the roar of waves slamming rock. Each crash rises like a gavel, as though the sea itself is handing down verdicts. The village has gone to ground behind U-doors, bolted lamps extinguished. But the sound of voices carries even now, muffled but unmistakable, drifting from a squat stone building perched above the tide. The police station, or what passes for one. The sign above the door, is little more than a flaking board, but the faint blue paint is enough to declare authority. You stand in its glow for a moment, amused at the contrast: an entire community draped in ritual, gossip, and superstition, and here a pocket of modern law clinging stubbornly to its patch of cliff. Inside, the place smells of wet wool and strong tea. A single constable sits at a desk stacked with papers, tapping a pencil against his lip. He glances up at you, eyes tired but not unfriendly. "Evening," he says, as though your presence at this hour is ordinary. Maybe it is. On the wall behind him hangs a notice board, crowded with missing person flyers. Some are new, crisp paper with ink still sharp. Others are yellowed, curling at the corners, their photographs fading. Men, women, teenagers. The collection spans decades. Your gaze catches on one, a woman with short hair and a defiant grin. Beneath only 2 words, "No trace." The constable clears his throat. "You're curious?" he says. Not accusatory, just a fact. His pencil taps once more. Curiosity's not always safe here. He doesn't explain, and you don't ask. You've already learned that questions in this town earn ledger entries, not answers. Historically, law enforcement in rural Britain lagged behind urban centers. In some coastal areas, crimes were handled informally well into the 20th century, with community elders settling disputes over ale rather than dragging matters to court. Historians still argue whether that system preserved harmony or concealed abuses. You glance again at the missing posters and wonder which of these disappearances were ever written into an official log, and which dissolved into whispers about the wives. A quirky detail catches your eye on the constable's desk, a paperweight shaped like a haddock carved from bone. It's chipped and yellowed, obviously old, yet he treats it like a talisman, shifting papers carefully so it never moves far from reach. When you raise a brow, he smirks faintly. Family heirloom. Keeps storms from blowing the wrong direction. The way he says it. From the cell at the back comes a faint noise: footsteps, a cough, then silence. The constable doesn't glance up. "We've got one in holding," he says, almost casually, "drunk on the quay. Says he saw the wives walking the causeway last night." He pauses, pencil frozen. Best not to press him on it. You thank him, though, for what you're not sure, and step back into the night. The sea spray is colder now, the tide higher, as though eager to erase footprints. Further along the cliff path, you pass the church. Its spire leans, stones mottled with lichens that glow pale in moonlight. A handful of gravestones tilt precariously toward the sea, their inscriptions washed away by centuries of storms. One remains legible: "Beloved Mother, taken by the tide, 1892. The words are simple, but you sense the weight behind them, the idea that the sea doesn't just claim bodies, it claims ownership. At the church door, you spot something pinned beneath the knocker, a page from a modern newspaper. The headline blares: "Police investigate coastal disappearance." No details, no photos, just the reminder that what you've been feeling isn't only folklore, it's happening still. Walking back toward the square, you see lantern light flicker in a window. A group of villagers are gathered inside, faces taut, voices low but urgent. They don't look up as you pass, but the tension in their posture is obvious: necks craned, shoulders hunched, eyes darting to the door. It's not a social visit. It's a council, an informal tribunal, deciding something that the constable's paper forms will never record. The clash is unavoidably and custom humming alongside modern policing. Which will the town obey? which has more weight. You can almost feel the scales tipping in real time, and you realize something unsettling. In places like this, law doesn't arrive in courtrooms or uniforms. It arrives in rituals, in silence, in the tightening of knots above doorframes. The police station might keep paperwork, but the wives, the idea of them, the fear of them still dictate what people actually do. You hear it again, faint, carried on the wind. The wives don't like being disturbed. And for the first time, you understand it isn't just superstition, it's enforcement. A system of justice, older and more intimate than blue paint and notice boards. The sea crashes louder, as though applauding the verdict. You keep walking, shoulders hunched against spray, and wonder whether the wives are guardians or executioners, or maybe both. The night air feels heavier now, as though each breath drags a little salt deeper into your lungs. You walk inland, away from the spray, following a lane that dips into shadows. The cottages thin out, giving way to sheds, stacks of lobster pots, and heaps of coiled rope that gleam faintly with dew. Somewhere close, a dog barks once, then goes silent as if warned. The ground softens into mud, and you nearly stumble on a wooden plank half buried in the earth. At first you think it's debris, some scrap discarded by fishermen. But when you tug it free, more planks shift, revealing the edge of a loose floorboard. You crouch, brushing away dirt, and a faint hollow sound answers your tap. Against all better instincts, you pry it up. Beneath lies a small compartment, dry despite the damp around it. Inside rests a bundle, tied with twine, a rolled sheet of paper, a cracked leather ledger, and oddly a key, shaped like a fish. You glance over your shoulder before unrolling the sheet. It's a map, hand-drawn, lines trembling but deliberate. The coastline is clear, dotted with coves and causeways. But what snags your attention are the markings X's, scattered like scars, each accompanied by a name scrawled in ink. Some names are familiar from gravestones, others from whispered gossip, and some are the same as those faces in the photograph. The ledger, when you flip it open, is worse. Pages filled with names, dates, short notes. Some simply say gone. Others add fragments. Tide took her, not returned. Silence kept. Your stomach knots as you realize it isn't a captain's log or a tradesman's account. It's a record of disappearances, all neatly catalogued, as though the vanishings were as ordinary as tracking fish stocks. That fish-shaped key rests heavy in your palm, cool as stone. What door could it possibly fit? You slip it into your pocket, though the weight feels more like responsibility than treasure. You remember a fact from history classes. In the 19th century, smuggling was rampant along Britain's coasts, with families keeping meticulous coded ledgers to avoid incrimination. Sometimes they hid them under floorboards, just like this, mapping not trade routes but safe houses and drop points. Historians still argue whether smuggling was survival or crime, heroism or greed. You wonder if this ledger was survival, too, but survival for whom? A quirky detail tucked into the margin of the map makes you pause, a doodle of a hare. Not a symbol you expect among knots and crosses. In folklore, hares were said to be shapeshifters, women slipping into animal skins to escape notice. Maybe the doodle was idle ink, or maybe it's another breadcrumb, another wink from those who kept the record. The wind stirs, lifting the corner of the map as if urging you onward. You tuck the papers back into their hiding place, though you keep the ledger and the key. Leaving them feels impossible now. When you rise, the moon has broken through, painting the mud in silver streaks. The path ahead gleams faintly, leading toward the cliffs again. You follow, heart thumping, every footstep echoing louder in your ears than it should. At the edge of the headland, the causeway stretches faintly in moonlight, stones slick, half submerged by the tide, linking the mainland to a dark mound offshore. You remember seeing it earlier, just a smudge on the horizon. Now it feels magnetic. The wind carries voices, low, rhythmic, almost like chanting. You strain to listen, but the sea swallows the words. The ledger under your arm seems to pulse in time with the rhythm, each syllable matching an entry. Gone, 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 gone. You pause, steadying yourself. Scholars debate whether such offshore mounds were ritual sites or just practical places for drying nets. Some argue they were both sacred and ordinary, depending on the tide. Historians still argue whether the blurred line was deliberate, a way of weaving belief into survival. Looking at that strip of stones vanishing under waves, you think the argument doesn't matter. Sacred or not, it's dangerous. You turn back before the tide traps you, retreating to firmer ground. On the way, you pass an abandoned shack, its roof half collapsed. Inside, moonlight filters through broken beams onto graffiti scratched into the walls. Words, rough but clear: she was taken, not lost. Another ledger tells the truth. And beneath them, drawn over and over in frantic repetition, the same fish-shaped key. You don't linger. The air is colder now, and the sea louder. You clutch the ledger tighter, aware you're carrying a piece of the town's hidden skeleton, a map of choices made in darkness, a record of lives written off like items in a tally. The wives' photograph felt like a warning. This ledger feels like evidence, and evidence is far heavier than whispers. The next morning creeps in, not with sunshine, but with a gray drizzle, the kind that feels like the sky can't decide whether to cry properly or just sulk. You step outside, ledger tucked discreetly in your jacket, and the town greets you with its usual blend of silence and watchfulness. Curtains twitch, doors open just a crack, then close again when they see you walking. You've stopped being a visitor and become something closer to a disruption. Your shoes squelch against the cobblestones, and you can't help imagining them amplified detch, step like a drumbeat, calling attention. The fish-shaped key in your pocket feels like it might clink loud enough for the whole key to hear. You need answers, but what you really crave is confession. And in this town, confession comes less from police reports and more from mouths too weary to keep silent. You pass the churchyard. The bells don't ring here anymore, not since the mechanism broke decades ago. A local once told you it was too expensive to fix, and anyway, everyone could tell the time by the tide. It's a practical explanation, but you can't shake the feeling that silence suits the place better than sound. Down by the harbor, you find him, an older fisherman named Ainsley, shoulders bent from years of hauling nets, skin toughened like leather. He sits on an upturned crate, mending a line with fingers that look too gnarled for such delicate work. You approach slowly, half expecting him to wave you off. Instead, he looks up with eyes clouded not just by cataracts, but by memory. "You've got it, haven't you?" he murmurs, voice low, almost lost under the slap of water against the key. You freeze. Got what? The ledger. His mouth twists into something between a smile and a grimace. Been waiting for someone fool enough to dig it out. You sit beside him, letting the drizzle bead on your jacket. He doesn't look at you, only at the knot between his hands. It wasn't meant for strangers, he continues. It was meant for us, a record, a reminder, every name written down so we'd never convince ourselves they just wandered off. But keeping a record doesn't mean keeping justice, does it? His words settle heavy, and you realize this is the storm season kind of confession. Abrupt, dangerous, and impossible to bottle once it starts. Ainsley sighs, tossing the repaired line aside. We knew, we always knew. The sea takes some eye, but not all. Some were taken by neighbors, by family, by those who thought themselves keepers of order. The dark wives, they called themselves in whispers, though no one dared speak it aloud, said they were only balancing scales, said silence was safety. The drizzle thickens into rain, blurring the horizon. You picture the map under the floorboards, those scattered X's, each a memory pinned down with ink. Why didn't you stop it? You ask before you can stop yourself. Ainsley finally meets your eyes. His are pale, nearly white, but sharp enough to cut, because sometimes the ones who knew were the ones who needed protecting most. And because in a town this small, you can't tell where loyalty ends and complicity begins. A seagull cries overhead, cutting the air like an accusation. You recall a curious bit of local folklore. Fishermen used to believe seagulls carried the souls of drowned sailors, circling overhead until peace was made. Historians still argue whether the belief came from superstition or from the uncomfortable truth that gulls often fed on the drowned. Either way, the sound now feels less like background noise and more like judgment. Ainsley pulls a flask from his pocket, takes a sip, then hands it to you. The liquid burns, sharp and briny, like it's distilled from the sea itself. Storm's coming, he mutters, not just in the sky. Best you be ready. That night, the storm arrives in full. Sheets of rain lash against the windows of your rented room. The wind howls down the chimney, making the fire sputter. And somewhere beneath it all, like a rhythm you can't unhear, you imagine voices rising, chanting, confessing. You take out the ledger again, flipping through its brittle pages. Ink smudges where water once seeped through. Some names are marked with a faint star, others underlined. At the very back, a newer hand has scrawled, "Confess before the tide takes it from you." The key sits beside it, glinting faintly in the firelight. You try it against the lock of your suitcase, just for curiosity. It doesn't fit. Of course not. Whatever door it belongs to, it isn't ordinary. Thunder cracks, shaking the glass. For a moment, the storm drowns every thought, every question. But then, in that lull between thunder and rain, you think you hear its 3 knocks on the door. Soft, deliberate, impossible. When you open it, no one stands there. Only the storm, howling down the alley. But at your feet lies a small scrap of paper, soaked nearly through. One word, still legible, soon. You close the door, bolt it, and lean back against the wood. Somewhere in this storm, confessions are circling like gulls, waiting for the tide to slacken. And whether you want it or not, you're now part of the reckoning. The storm doesn't vanish, just shifts, the way tempests do when they grow tired of hammering a roof and decide to chase someone across open water instead. By late afternoon, the next day, the drizzle has worn itself out, and the clouds stretch thin, frayed like old nets. The causeway gleams in the weak light, water pulling back just far enough to reveal its slippery stones. You stand at the edge, the ledger under your arm, and the fish-shaped key in your pocket. Every sensible nerve in your body tells you not to cross. Causeways have a history of betrayal. A road one moment, a trap the next. Whole carts of supplies, even whole funeral processions, have been swallowed by tides because someone thought they had more time. Historians still argue whether one famous collapse in the 17th century was divine punishment or just bad planning. Either way, people drowned. You tell yourself this is just a walk, but your pulse says otherwise. The air smells of iron, that tempts of salt water, mixed with something almost metallic. You step onto the first slick stone, wobble, and nearly laugh at your own gracelessness. 3 steps in, you realize you're not alone. A figure waits at the midpoint, hunched under a coat, hair whipping in the wind. You tread carefully, boots slipping, until you're close enough to see her face. It's Elspeth's sharp cheekbones, eyes the color of storm glass. She's one of the names in the photograph, one of the wives whose gaze seemed to follow you. Seeing her here is like stepping into the map itself. You found the ledger, she says, not accusing, not surprised. Her voice carries, despite the wind, clear as a bell that hasn't rung in decades. You nod. Words feel clumsy, useless. Her lips twitch into something almost like amusement. Of course you did. Outsiders always dig where we learned to step lightly. The tide is whispering louder now, waves slapping against the stones. You imagine them rising inch by inch, timing your hesitation. Elspeth holds out her hand. In her palm rests a lock-rusted, ornate, carved with scales. The shape matches the key in your pocket. Your throat tightens. You can open it, she says softly, or you can turn back. But no, this truth doesn't keep people safe. Silence does. At least, it used to. A gull swoops overhead, screeching, as if to punctuate her warning. You want to laugh, to ease the tension. This feels very escape room, but the words fall flat. Because you can tell from her steady stare that nothing here is playful. You slip the key from your pocket. Its weight feels inevitable now. When you place it in her lock, it turns with shocking ease, clicking open as though the sea itself approves. The lock falls, revealing a small, iron-bound chest at her feet, half hidden by seaweed. She lifts the lid, and the smell hits you first. Brine, old paper, something faintly sweet, like flowers, pressed too long in salt. Inside lie bundles of letters, each bound with twine. You reach for one, hands trembling. The letter you unfold is written in careful script. It isn't a confession, it's a plea. A woman writing to her sister, explaining that she couldn't stay silent anymore, that the wives were choosing who lived and who was swept away, that she feared being marked next. You read line after line, rain smearing the ink until the tide splashes against your ankles. Elspeth doesn't flinch. We kept them here, she says. The voices that weren't allowed to echo anywhere else. Hidden until someone brave or foolish came along. Your chest tightens. Why me? Because you asked, she replies simply. And once you ask, the sea always answers. You tuck the letter back into its bundle, water dripping from your cuffs. The ledger in your jacket feels heavier than stone. Between it and this chest, you're carrying the kind of truth that doesn't set people free, pins them down. The tide surges higher, tugging at your boots. Elspeth snaps the chest shut, reties the lock, and presses the key back into your palm. Her expression softens, just for a heartbeat. Confession feels like a storm, cleansing, dangerous. You decide if the storm is worth weathering. By the time you look up, she's retreating across the causeway, moving with balance that borders on supernatural. You follow, Every step, a small battle against the sea. At the shore, you glance back. The mound is already half vanished, water swallowing it as if it were never there. Later, back in your room, you dry the letter as best you can. The words blur, but don't disappear. Historians might debate for centuries whether such stories were hysteria, folklore, or fact. But the wet paper in your hands doesn't care about debate. It only cares that someone, finally, is reading. Outside, the tide hammers the quay, relentless. Confessions circle like gulls overhead. And you, drenched and shivering, realize you've joined the storm, whether you meant to or not. Morning breaks with a deceptive brightness, sunlight piercing the clouds, as though the storm never happened. The gulls wheel lazily above, their cries less like accusations now and more like heckling from a rowdy audience. You sip the weakest tea you've ever tasted, somehow both bitter and watery, and stare at the ledger sprawled open across the table. The letters you dried overnight are tucked beside it, their corners still curled, faint salt stains edging the paper. The town doesn't look different, but it feels different. People glance at you as though they know what you carry, and maybe they do. Secrets this old have a way of seeping into walls, clothing, even the cobblestones. You walk toward the community hall, a squat stone building with peeling paint and windows clouded by years of sea spray. It looks incapable of holding anything as grand as judgment, yet today it will. Inside, benches creak under the weight of villagers. Men with hands calloused from nets, women with faces like weathered cliffs, children fidgeting, not quite aware of the gravity. A notice board still bears posters for last year's fair, curling at the corners. At the front, a table is set up, papers neatly stacked, and a local magistrate ported from another town clears his throat like he's about to announce raffle winners, rather than preside over whispered crimes. You slide into a seat at the back, ledger heavy on your lap. Elspeth is there too, perched upright, gaze steady as if she's braced for waves. Ainsley mutters in the corner, flask conspicuously absent, hands trembling against his knees. The proceedings start not with evidence, but with stories. Each person who speaks begins the same way. I remember phrase echoes, weaving memory into testimony. One woman recalls the night her mother vanished, leaving boots by the door. Another recalls hearing oars creak long after the tide should have made rowing impossible. Each account threads another knot into the rope of truth, though some strands fray with contradiction. Historians still argue whether memory is evidence. Entire academic conferences are devoted to debating how oral history warps with time, whether it's truth diluted by perspective or truth sharpened by pain. Sitting here, you realize the scholars miss something. Memory isn't evidence because it's tidy. It's evidence because it refuses to leave. When the ledger is finally placed on the magistrate's table, the air tightens. Pages flutter as though eager to speak. He flips through, brows furrowing, pausing at the names, the dates, the blunt tally marks. This, he declares, is damning. Yet one voice interrupts. Old Mrs. Penelagon, nearly blind, leaning on a stick carved with gull feathers. She cackles, dry as driftwood. Damning, maybe, or maybe it's just ink. Paper doesn't drown folk, people do. Her words slice sharper than any gavel. The hall hums with murmurs. Confession has started to feel less like release and more like contagion. Every whispered truth sparks another, like flint against stone. Someone mentions a fight at sea. Another, mutters about poisoned stew. Another swears they saw a woman push her neighbor into the tide during a quarrel. Stories pile until you can't tell which are memory, which are vengeance, which are survival tactics dressed as folklore. A quirky tidbit surfaces in the middle of it all. One man insists his uncle wore garlic tied around his neck to ward off sea witches. The room chuckles, the first sound of levity all day. Historians might roll their eyes, but it breaks the tension long enough for the magistrate to regain control. He clears his throat. We cannot retry the past, he says, but we can acknowledge it. The words sound hollow, like nails hammered into soft wood. Elspeth rises, slow and deliberate. Acknowledgement isn't enough, she says. We've carried these names too long. If you bury them again, the sea will only spit them back. That's what it does, it returns what's been hidden. Her voice doesn't waver, though her hands tremble at her sides. For a moment, the entire hall seems to breathe in sync with her. The magistrate sighs, shuffling papers. And what would you have us do? Punish ghosts, sentence the tide. Elspeth's answer is simple. Remember. The word lands heavier than judgment, heavier than law, because remembering is the opposite of silence, and silence was the town's real crime. You sit there, heart pounding, realizing you're no longer just an observer, you're a witness, and witnesses are responsible for carrying memory forward, whether they asked for it or not. By the time the meeting disperses, the sky has shifted again, clouds gathering like jury robes. The town hasn't found closure. Closure feels like a luxury here, but it has found exposure, and exposure changes everything. You step outside, ledger clutched tight, gulls shrieking above. For centuries, trials have tried to shape truth into something digestible. Today, you've seen truth in its rawest form. Contradictory, messy, impossible to smooth over. Historians will argue about it forever. But for you, standing in the damp, salt air, one thing is certain: the tide has shifted. And once the tide turns, nothing stays buried. Night descends with a quiet authority, the way a curtain falls across a stage. The town, now scattered into homes and cottages, seems smaller, its secrets pressed tighter into stone and timber. You walk through streets slick with leftover rain, the ledger heavier in your arms, the letters tucked under your jacket like fragile bones. Every shadow feels like it's been waiting for you, every lamppost an observer with memory. The causeway lies ahead, half drowned again by the returning tide. You hesitate, boots squelching in shallow puddles, the rhythmic slap of water against stone, a hypnotic metronome. Somewhere along this path, centuries of silence converge, stories told and untold, names whispered under breath, letters hidden under floorboards. You are carrying it all now. Elspeth appears beside you without a sound, a shadow among shadows. She doesn't speak at first, only watches as you trace the stones ahead, each step careful. Then she murmurs, the tide takes and returns. It is not mercy, nor punishment, it simply obeys itself. The same is true for memory. You nod, though you're not sure you fully understand. Historians still argue whether the cycles of memory in coastal communities were intentional social enforcement or organic survival instinct. Standing here, ledger in hand, the argument seems less academic and more visceral. The wind shifts, carrying a faint scent of brine and lavender. It reminds you of the small garden with the scarecrow in the bridesmaid dress. Quirky, yes, but meaningful. Symbolism persists in ways the living often forget. The wives left markers everywhere, in knots, in graffiti, in locked chests. And now you carry the keys, literally and metaphorically. You step onto the causeway, water laps around your boots. Every X on the map, every name in the ledger, every letter folded with care weighs as much as stone. You can almost hear the faint whisper of voices, a chorus rising from beneath the tide. Confessions, warnings, observations, love, anger, fear. The wives' authority isn't just myth. It's embedded in the landscape, in the ritual of observation, in the ledger you carry. A gull dips low, wings slicing the wind. You catch the glint of the sun on water, the world reflecting in fragments like broken mirrors. It is unsettling and beautiful in equal measure. The ledger feels heavier than before, but the key is lighter. Perhaps because it is no longer just a tool, it is a symbol of responsibility, of the pact you've entered with history, memory, and the sea. Elspeth steps back, disappearing into the shadow of the cliffs. You glance down at the chest, now secured, letters safe, the tide retreating, revealing stones polished by centuries. One last glance at the horizon, and you understand, truth is cyclical, like the tide. The ledger and letters are only temporary holders of stories, just as the stones are only temporary foundations for memory. And as you turn to leave, you hear the faintest ripple of acknowledgement, almost human, almost approving. The town sleeps, the sea hums, and for the first time, the dark wives feel less threatening, more like guardians of the ledger, protectors of the stories that must not be forgotten. You trudge back through the quiet streets, boots leaving small impressions that the tide will erase. The weight of history pressing against your shoulders, the ledger now an extension of your own story. Outside, the wind hums like a lullaby, the gulls wheel overhead, and the sea continues its eternal rhythm. You are part of it now, a custodian of memory, a witness to secrets once silenced. The night has softened, and the town now seems to exhale along with you. Every window, every shutter, every stone wall that watched you move through its streets has relaxed. You breathe deeply, feeling the salt in the air settle into a rhythm that matches your own. The ledger lies beside you, letters tucked gently against it, their stories no longer threatening, but simply present, like memories finally allowed to rest. Outside, the tide laps quietly, each wave a gentle pulse, a reminder that time moves steadily, erasing footsteps, yet keeping traces alive in ways the eye cannot see. You imagine the wives, not as shadows or threats, but as echoes, guardians of this rhythm, watching not to punish, but to preserve. And in that thought, the tension you carried for days begins to dissolve, replaced with the soft assurance that stories, even those hidden, whispered, feared half a way of surviving. You stretch your arms, letting the chill of night air creep in, blending with warmth from inside. Every sense is alert, yet soothed. The gull's distant cries have become a lullaby, the wind a gentle hum against your skin. Even the memory of the causeway, the chest, and the ledger has lost its sharp edges. They now exist as threads in a tapestry that you are part of, and part of them is now yours. You feel the gravity of history, memory, and the sea intertwine. But it's no longer a weighted. You can almost hear the town breathing, alive with stories, quiet yet vibrant, and you recognize your role as witness, storyteller, and custodian. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the night carry you. The wives, the town, the tide, and the ledger rests alongside you. Sleep can come now, gentle and untroubled, as the world outside continues its eternal, rhythmic whisper.